Shalom Aleichem, everybody.
Shalom Aleichem.
Thank you. And my name is Elisa Kaplan, and I'm president of the Jewish Historical Society of Fairfield County. How is everybody tonight? Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. There we go. I'm getting some thumbs up. Good. I hope you're doing okay in these times. Yes. Hi, Sally.
Hey.
So we're welcoming people from Berkeley to Falmouth to Stanford to Norwalk to Herndon to Delaware, Bethany Beach, all over the country, and we're glad to have you here.
Great.
It looks like we have 31 people so far and more are coming. We are recording this program. So if you don't want to be seen or heard, please turn off your audio, which is that picture of the microphone. And where it says stop video, that will take away your picture. Now, welcome Yiddishers. If you've ever come to one of our Yiddish sessions, Abyssal Yiddish, please wave at us. Yep, see all those people waving? Those are people who come to our Abyssal Yiddish. Okay, Abyssal Yiddish is like a coffee clutch. We meet the first Friday of the month at 10 a.m. We used to be at the JCC in Stanford, but now we're on Zoom. Nothing stops Yiddish. Check out our website or contact me for the link. Our coffee clutch, though, now requires you to bring your own coffee and anything else you want to snack, and any other nosh that you want. Our head macher is Judy Liebeskin, and she's in our audience today. And she put all this together for us recently in the last year or two, and it's been a real hit. And look where it took us tonight. And our Yiddish maven, Judy Altman, reads a 100-year-old letter from the foreword, from Bintel Brief in the foreword. It's so great to hear the language. Right, Alex? So we'll hear more of why Yiddish today. You're going to tell us a little bit more about that.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Okay. Everyone is welcome to our book talks and programs. Oops, it's a commercial. To help us serve you better, we encourage you to become a member. Membership is $50 a year for your household or yourself. So here we go. Let's get on with our program. So tonight is, in many ways, is not the usual lecture, but I have to say, does the Jewish Historical Society of Fairfield County ever have a usual lecture? Probably not. Marcy Schoenfeld and I will be interviewing our guest, Alex Weiser, who is getting older and wiser, he says. And now I'm going to introduce our speaker. I'm going to do this by asking you a question. What do these 5 words have in common? Guitar, Yale, Debussy, Mama Lotion, and the East Village. Well, what these 5 words have in common is Alex Weiser. Take it away, Alex.
Well, hello. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you, and yeah, I'm honored to join the community here to talk about my work a bit.
Okay, should I start?
Sure.
Okay, Alex, where did you grow up? And tell us something about your parents and maybe your grandparents.
Sure. So I grew up in New York City, in the East Village. My family was kind of like a typical, New York Jewish family. We went to Hebrew school, and we went to shul for the high holidays. We weren't super observant otherwise, and I heard a little bit of Yiddish here and there, like you know, the kind of words and phrases that most people know, but I didn't grow up speaking in Yiddish. I didn't grow up speaking Yiddish or knowing Yiddish. I kind of became interested in it later.
Well, you just cut out 3 questions by answering that extensively. What about your grandparents? They were immigrants, or they were already here?
My grandparents were pretty much all born here in New York or thereabouts. And my family's actually came to the United States in like the 1880s. So,
Wow.
yeah, we've been here for a long time.
Where'd they come from?
Different places in, you know, Eastern Europe, you know, the kinds of places that changed borders constantly. My sister and I are actually trying to figure out where our great-great-grandfather exactly came from. And, you know, one form says Austria, another form says Galicia, another form says Lemberg, another form says Kolashova. So, you know, I think that's kind of the case with all the different, you know, different lines in my family. But basically, you know, Eastern Europe, Russia, the usual suspects.
You mentioned your sister. Any other siblings?
Nope, I just have one sister.
Okay. Can you tell us about your education?
Sure. So I started studying music, you know, privately. I was just kind of really interested. And I continued at Stuyvesant High School, which is where I went to school here in New York. And then I did a degree in music at Yale University. And then after that, I went to New York University. In both places, I studied with composers that are, you know, people whose music I really love, and maybe we'll talk about that more later. But I think as for the education of a composer, it really matters who you study with, not so much where you go to school.
Were you brought up with a lot of music? That's why you were interested in studying music?
So my parents aren't musicians, but my dad is a big music lover. And so we grew up listening to a lot of music around the house, and that definitely made a big impression on me. And at a certain point, I just kind of, you know, really loved listening to music, and I was just curious to engage deeper. So I started playing instruments, and I started kind of, you know, getting interested in that way.
Did you have a backup plan besides music? Your career? I imagine as a Jewish son, they want you to maybe pursue something else.
Yeah, my parents are still coming to terms with it. So that's an open question.
What else did you major in music? What'd you minor in?
I didn't have a minor, but one of the reasons that I chose to go to Yale as opposed to a conservatory was that I was getting a lot of advice in my life at that time that it would be great to have, you know, a kind of well-rounded liberal arts education, which could potentially take me in a lot of different directions. And that actually is something that I really do appreciate, having that background, you know, studying Shakespeare and quantum physics and, you know, all sorts of different things that I had a chance to study at Yale, because, you know, what I found as a composer is that it's not just about, you know, pushing notes around in an abstract sense, but writing music about things in the world really, for me, is a really interesting and exciting thing to do. And so I'm really grateful for that experience of getting a chance to study so many different things. And then I really kind of still retain that intellectual curiosity. It's a big part of my life.
You mentioned to us privately about your high school teachers that really helped you to pursue music. You want to say something about them?
Yeah, sure. So I went to Stuyvesant High School, but, you know, at that point I really wasn't specializing in music. And I started, let's see how it happened. Well, I took a music appreciation class, and it was in that class that I really discovered classical music, because I had at that point really listened to mostly like classic rock and blues and things of that nature. And I took this music appreciation class. It was kind of a remedial course that everyone had to take. And I just really fell in love with the music that was studied, you know, Bach and Stravinsky. It was really ear-opening for me. And it just kind of took me down this path. And then shortly thereafter, I went over to the AP music theory teacher, Joseph Thomasitis, who's a wonderful teacher, a mentor. And I said, you know, I want to learn more. I want to take AP music theory. which was really, at Stuyvesant, I mean, they had orchestra, they had choir, and they had music appreciation, and they had AP music theory. So other than I didn't play any instruments that would allow me to be in the orchestra, so it felt like AP music theory was my next step. And I talked to him, and he said, well, do you know your scales and your modes? And I was like, no, not really. Do you know your chords and your intervals? So, well, not exactly. And he said, well, of course you can't be in this class. It's far too advanced for you. But I insisted that I would learn everything I needed if he just gave me a chance. And he said, all right, well, take this book home and study it over the summer. And, if you know it when you get back in the fall, then I'll let you in the class. And it was an amazing opportunity that he let me do that. And I did it. I was like, really took it extremely seriously. I came back ready to go. And I took AP Music Theory my sophomore year. It was an amazing experience. And I also started studying at that time with composer Paul Allen Levy, just privately. And those were kind of like my Joseph Tomasitis and Paul Levy were my two early mentors in composition. And I'm really grateful for the guidance that they gave me at that time and continued. I'm still in touch with both of them.
Great. Let's get to the Yiddish part. Since you said you didn't speak Yiddish at home, so how did you learn Yiddish, and then why then writing music for Yiddish?
So what happened was when I first graduated from college, I got a job at this organization called MATA. MATA is a festival of contemporary classical music that was founded by Philip Glass and Eleanor Sandreski and Lisa Bielawa in 1996. And it's a really eclectic, avant-garde, international classical music festival, which features music by young and emerging composers from around the world. And that's where I worked for about 5 years when I first graduated from college. And I was very firmly in the music world. That's what I studied. That's what my day-to-day life was. All my friends were in the music world. Sometime, towards the end of that, I got an email, through the grapevine. YIVO, the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research, reached out to me that they were looking for someone to help with their public programs. And so for those that don't know, YIVO is this really incredible library and archive of Jewish history and Jewish culture. And YIVO has this amazing, enormous collection of materials that scholars from around the world use. And YIVO also has public programs and exhibitions and educational programs. And so it's a very robust, amazing organization. But it's also, at that time, it's an organization I really didn't know anything about. Oddly enough, because I grew up just a few blocks away from where YIVO has been for the last 20 years. But it wasn't really on my radar. But they reached out to me, and I went in to talk with them, and they were kind of looking for someone that was a little bit on the outside of the Jewish studies world, because YIVO is very much, a hardcore Jewish studies place. All the scholars of Yiddish and of Jewish history, especially of Ashkenazi history, but of other parts of Jewish history as well, are really knowledgeable about YIVO and are in the inner circle of YIVO. But YIVO is interested in reaching other people outside of that as well. And so part of reaching out to me was the thought that, well, we want someone, who's going to help us bring our message, bring the kind of work that we're doing to people that don't already know about it. And so I was very much as an individual in that category of someone whose background is really aligned with YIVO, but who just didn't really know about it. And so being a little bit of an outsider, I think, made me what they were looking for at that time. And then I went to YIVO, and I took this job, and it was an exciting change. And to be honest, was a little bit nervous about it because, as I said, my whole world was musicians and composers and people playing contemporary classical music. So the idea of going and working for this, Jewish history and culture, library and archive, it felt like a really big kind of scary change, but I was also really curious and really excited about the mission. So I plunged forward and I went to YIVO. And at YIVO, YIVO just kind of opened my eyes to so much amazing culture. And, I'm still working at YIVO. Now it's about 4.5 years later. And, you know, at YIVO, so I run the public programs at YIVO. So we do something like 40, 50 programs a year, lectures, conversation panels, theatrical performances, movie screenings, and also concerts. And that was also a big part of what was exciting to me about working at YIVO, is that YIVO has this amazing collection of Jewish music in its archive and in its library. And they said, you know, one of the reasons we would like you, Alex, is because we want someone to curate concerts with this music. And so I was also very excited about that. And so being at YIVO and going to all the events and planning all the events, I quickly became immersed in this whole world. And a few months later, after I started, was the Yiddish summer program, where they have a 6-week kind of immersion Yiddish language program. And they said, you know, feel free to sit in on classes. And to me, you know, that was just a dream. Well, I could go downstairs and just learn my whole morning instead of sitting at my desk. I'm, you know, game. So I took the beginner Yiddish class, and it totally changed my life. You know, I studied Hebrew as a kid, but I always had trouble with it. And but when I learned Yiddish, it felt like almost like a homecoming of a sort. Much more comfortable, and there were so many turns of phrases that were familiar to me, and so much of the sensibility was familiar to me. And so I started learning Yiddish, and where it came into my music was shortly after that, I got this call from this organization called Roulette. Roulette is a concert hall and a kind of incubator and supporter of contemporary classical music. And Roulette's an amazing organization. I was extremely thrilled, excited, honored to get this call from them, where they said, you know, Alex, we want to commission you. And the thing that was so special about this commission from Roulette is that unlike many commissions that a composer will get, you'll get something like, what will happen is you'll get a call from a string quartet, and they'll say, I'd like you to write something, but it's got to be between 8 and 12 minutes, and it's got to be, you know, for the 4 of us to play. And actually, you know, we're playing a Beethoven piece on that concert. Maybe it could have something to do with that. That would be nice if you don't mind. You know, usually it's something along those lines of the kind of calls you get. But the call from Roulette was, Alex, we'd like to commission you, and we'd like you to do whatever you want. Just the sky's the limit. This is the budget, and just let us know what you want to do. And so that gave me an opportunity to really think about where I was at in my life, and where I was at in the music that I was making, and the art that I was making. And I just thought, you know, it would be really interesting to do something with this whole Yiddish world that I was discovering. And in particular, the thing that really resonated with me on an artistic level is the fact that in Yiddish, there's an amazing culture of poetry. And including modernist poetry, including secular poetry. And that just really resonated with me so much because, you know, as I mentioned earlier, my relationship to Jewishness, to Jewish identity is really largely a secular one and a cultural one. And I actually am very interested in religious things and as a kind of intellectual curiosity. And I have great respect for the religious aspect of Jewish identity, but my own connection is really more of a cultural one. And so to discover that there are these amazing poets dealing with kind of questions of life and death and love and finding meaning in life, and dealing so from the perspective of a Jewish language, Yiddish, it was really exciting to me. And I thought, you know, this is something that I'd love to engage with in my music. And so I did, and it was a rewarding experience, and it remains a rewarding experience.
Okay, Lisa, you want to take over now?
I was going to say, let's hear a little piece of your music.
The song. So this is the first song on my album. So this song cycle that I wrote for Roulette became my first album. I released it in last April 2019. And this is the poem I chose to start this piece, and that starts the album. It's by a poet named Anna Margolin. That's actually her pen name. Gewann is efscher das mein Glück, vielen wie deine Augen haben sich vor mir gebeugen. Nein, gewann ist das mein Glück, gehen schweigendig hin und her mit dir über den Square. Nein, nicht das, nur her, wenn über unser Fried vielleicht schmeichelndig sich einbegen der Tod. und alle Tage seinen gewähnt purpurn und alles schwer. Perhaps this was my happiness, to feel how your eyes bowed down before me. No, rather this was my happiness, to go silently back and forth across the square with you. No, not even that, but listen, how over our joy there hovered the smiling face of death, and all the days were purple, and all were hard. Now I will, I'll play it for you. This is the cover of the album.
Which, by the way, was a runner-up for the Pulitzer for music. Just, I'm tooting his horn.
Thank you very much. And here's that opening track.
Alex, when did she write that poem? Do you know?
Oops.
It was published in her only book of published poetry in 1929. I don't know the exact year that she wrote the poem before she published it in that book, but sometime thereabouts.
Okay.
So I didn't realize there was a Pulitzer Prize for music. Can you elaborate about that a little bit?
Yeah, so there is a Pulitzer Prize for music, and it's there's only one category for music. So for journalism, there are a lot of different categories for the different kinds of journalism, and there are also awards for drama and for other categories. And for music, there's one Pulitzer for all of music. I think when it first started, it was limited to classical music, and at some point they decided to also include jazz in that same award. So sometimes it goes to a jazz composer, sometimes it goes to a classical composer. And a few years ago, they awarded it to Kendrick Lamar for an album of rap or hip hop. So now it's kind of maximally open to all of the music out there.
Right, and Winston Marsalis won as well, right?
I think that's right, yeah.
Yeah, so so it may not be the people that we would necessarily expect from our. So tell us. I think I'm going to ask you to play, if it's possible, to play another song. But
sure.
But before you do, would you define for us what you mean by contemporary classical music?
Well, so there's a wonderful tradition of classical music which goes back for quite a long time, and I think people often think of classical music as being Mozart, Beethoven, that kind of music. And in fact, there's a wonderful tradition that really continued unabated and continues to this day. With composers like Stravinsky and Debussy writing in, and then many others, and leading right into today. And so, I don't really think when I'm writing music, I'm not necessarily trying to be a part of classical music, so to speak, as opposed to any other kind of music. For me, the boundaries between things are fluid, but the thing that I think defines the music that I'm writing and that what makes me a part of this classical music tradition is the fact that the music that I'm writing, it's really about the notated score. So, whereas in popular music, often pieces are created by a band collaboratively, orally, or through playing, and or sometimes created in the studio, where the recording is really an integral part of the creation of the composition itself. And you can think of like Beatles albums where they're all just creating new sounds, and the sound world of the album is really more the piece, so to speak, than perhaps the notes and the rhythms on the page. And so for me personally, I am just really excited by the kind of the conceit of classical music, for lack of a better word, where the job of the composer is to write a score and hand it over to musicians who then interpret it and play it. And the idea that the piece lives above and beyond just the album recording of it, above and beyond any particular performance. The piece is a kind of set of instructions to bring it into being. So that's really kind of what being a part of this tradition means to me. And it's a wonderful one that exists alongside many other amazing musical traditions that I also love. But this is the one that I kind of dedicate my time to, so to speak.
So can we hear another song?
Sure. Let me pull a poem for you. This one is called Bankschaft, and I'm going to just chat you the poem. Here it is in Yiddish Oisius. Here it is in transliteration. And here is a translation. And I'll let you all read that out loud, reread that to yourselves while I play the music. So just hold on here.
Einziger Sinnen von der steckten Treue hat Truppen Sie kissen schon über die Schön wie Kreuzes in der Zweite die Hoffnung
Wow.
Alex, when was that written? Sort of risque.
Yeah, it is a bit risque. You know, I actually don't know the year of that poem off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But it's by a wonderful poet, Rachel Korn, who made her way to Canada.
Right, and as a name so just so we could hear, would you just read the Yiddish to us for Bankshaft so that people can hear the sound of the language?
Sure. Sie sind meine Chaloimes so voll mit Bankschaft. Als es schmeckt a jeden in der Früh, mein Leib mit dir. Und sie trinkt zu Pamelech auf mein verklemmter Lipp, der einziger Simen von der stickten Treuer a Tropfen Blut. Und sie gießen scheun über die Schauen wie Käuses, eine in der Zweiter, die Hoffnung wie teuren Wein. Als du bist nicht weit, als Ort a jeder Rege, kennst du kommen, kommen, kommen.
There you go. And a very heartfelt and a very visceral poem that that we can really hear in both the music and in the original words. So I understand you may have another side of your personality that has to do with opera. How did opera come into your life?
Well, yeah, I mean, I love opera, and I've loved opera for a long time. You know, I mean, I really love writing songs, and this project that we're just looking at really reflects that. And in opera, you have songs, which is wonderful, and you have this other added element of telling a story, you know, with music and with words. And so, you know, this album that these songs that we just heard which they're from, it's lyrical, and it has ideas, and it has a shape, and it has a kind of arc to it, but it's not really telling a story, so to speak. But opera does often do that, and that's a really exciting thing as well. And so a few years ago, I was really lucky to be a fellow with American Opera Projects, which is this organization that supports young and emerging composers to write American opera. And when I was a fellow there, I started working on an opera about Theodore Herzl. And well, we developed it a bit there. And over the course of the years that followed, I and my collaborator, Ben Kaplan, who wrote the libretto, I know we've got a lot of Kaplans in the house.
No, not a relative.
Not that we know of. We, over the course of a few years, wrote this opera, and it was last December, we did a series of preview performances at the 14th Street Y, where we did kind of somewhere in between a staged reading and a full performance. So, when you're developing an opera, it's a big, complicated endeavor. So often people will, do kind of workshops along the way, and we did many workshops. And sometimes you'll do a workshop where the music will be performed, but the actors will not be, acting and embodying the characters. They'll just be performing the music. So we did some workshops like that. And we culminated our process of workshopping in December with what we call the preview performance. And so this was a full-fledged performance of the whole opera with everyone in costumes and everyone acting. However, everyone read their sheet music during the whole show. So they were acting, but they had their sheet music in their hands. And we did have a full, we had a choir and we had an ensemble, instrumental ensemble. And so we kind of like got the piece up on its feet. We did it for 4 shows. We had wonderful crowds and we even got a little bit of nice press. And now we have a nice recording of it. So we're hoping to do a full performance at some point soon when people are, performing operas again.
Okay, so this is not a Yiddish piece, right?
That's
us
right. Yeah. So
the
we
story. How did you get involved with Theodore Herzl?
Well, it's actually my collaborator, Ben Kaplan, who first had the idea. And I remember one night, many years ago, actually, long before we started really writing the piece, he told me that it was his dream to write a piece about, to write a musical dramatic work about Theodore Herzl. And I thought, why? That's what a topic for that. And he told me, well, one of the things that's really interesting about Herzl is that he had this amazing larger than life, career and story. And the more I learned about Herzl's story, it really does lend itself to opera in how over the top it is, how many contradictions are in his story, and also the way that he is, in many ways, he is very heroic, but in many ways he's also kind of an anti-hero. And these ideas side by side make him such a really complex, fascinating character to explore. So, when we wrote the opera, we wanted to show both the side of him that we all remember, that we learn in our Jewish schools about, him as a kind of visionary of the state of Israel. But also we wanted to show him as a really complex and in many ways flawed individual, because he had a very troubled relationship with his wife, and his work on the Zionist cause really took quite a toll on the family, actually. And even beyond that dichotomy itself of the kind of public heroism and of the private difficulty of his relationship, he as a thinker as a political thinker, he in many ways was more complex than we remember him today. And one of the elements of that is often overlooked is that one of his last big stands as a politician was at the Sixth Zionist Congress to promote or to bring up to the discussion the idea of the Jewish people creating a state in Uganda. And of course, that is not what ended up happening, but these kind of contradictions that when you look at the story of Theodore Herzl, it's actually so much more complex and so much more rich and nuanced than the kind of black and white image of him that we often see in contemporary Jewish culture. That made it just feel like really ripe for exploration and to tell a really complex and nuanced story that has a lot of emotion and a lot of different perspectives in it, but doesn't really resolve any of these issues. And that's one of the things that I really like about telling stories, is to try to find things that are meaty and unresolved that can be kind of sat on and thought about and lived with, rather than if it's got an easy answer, maybe we don't need an opera about it.
There you go. Well, can we have a peek?
Sure. So I will play from the preview performance that I was talking about. We have a nice video of it. So I'll play a little excerpt of a song that Theodore Herzl's wife, Julie, sings to him in the first act, where they're having this big argument over what's going to happen when he publishes The Jewish State, his famous book. And in the opera, she's really worried that this is going to be, something he can't take back, and it's going to take him on this journey away from the family, and it's going to be kind of furthering what's been going on, where he has been working, doing his work and not neglecting the family, and also neglecting their kind of bourgeois Viennese dream that they had had. When they first got married, he was definitely not involved in Jewish politics, and they were kind of a kind of upper crust, Viennese culture. And his work with Zionism really kind of took him away from that. And so that's what this aria is about. She's kind of pleading with him and trying to make him remember those things that he has left behind. So I'll play you this aria now.
Oh my.
I should just mention the singer is Christine Gornstein. And their acting but silent in this particular moment is Mario Diaz-Marisco plays Theodore Herzl. And on that note, I should mention that the wonderful singer on my album is Eliza Bagg.
So thank you for giving us those names. It's a very um, weighty title of your opera, The State of the Jews. Oh boy, we could say that, use those words every day, and applies to both his time and ours. Do you want to say anything else about that?
Sure, yeah, so that was kind of the idea with the title, is that it's both the title of his book, Der Judenstaat, could be translated as the Jewish state, but the state of the Jews, phrasing it that way, kind of implies this double meaning, that it's not just about the national reality of the Jews, but also the situation of the Jews, the matzav, so to speak, the how, the state of being, and so that's in that way the story very much, I think, resonates with the contemporary audience, contemporary Jewish audience, and also contemporary Jewish American audience, because we are Jews in the diaspora, just like Herzl was a Jew in the diaspora, and we, in a way, I think, maybe even more so than contemporary Israeli Jews, for whom, Zionism is the history of their nation, their national reality. For American Jews, this story really has a lot to say about our relationship to, to be existing in a largely non-Jewish world, and how we juggle those things, and how we manage the different kind of pushes and pulls that are in our community. Really, those are the challenges that we're facing Theodore Herzl. Those were the challenges that we're facing Julie Herzl. And so, their kind of argument and the way that they are navigating these questions, in a way, it's more similar to our experience today, rather than an Israeli perspective, where they have kind of different questions about what it means to be a Jew, what it means to be Israeli. So it's a story that continues to resonate. And, on a political level, I just find it so fascinating. In the last, week or two, I read 2 op-eds which said the opposite thing, and they both said that Theodore Herzl would have agreed with them. And it really was, for me, a sign that we picked a really good opera topic, because, the memory of Theodore Herzl is used to mean so many different things to so many different people. And it's really just a testament to how fascinating and kind of unresolved his legacy is still to this day.
Right, and as a journalist, I'm sure Theodore Herzl is probably chiming in from beyond. And I think that all of us who've ever had a dream so far away, we can relate to that, whether it's our dream or someone we love who has a dream that's so far away. What a strong and amazing line. So what's the future for Alex Weiser as you grow older and wiser, in the world of music, in the world of Yiddish, in the world of opera, or in any other way you'd like to tell us?
Well, I don't know, but we'll find out. We're very hopeful that this opera will be performed in its entirety in a kind of full production at some point, and that is very much contingent on the post-COVID realities. And we had some folks who were really interested, who we were talking with, but everything, obviously, as I'm sure everyone knows from their own lives, is on hold or is postponed or is canceled. So we're really just kind of waiting to see what happens with the opera. And it's definitely my hope to write, lots more music and lots more songs, in particular, more Yiddish songs, more Hebrew songs, and just more songs in general. So we'll see where it takes me. In terms of Yiddish, as I mentioned, I am the director of public programs of YIVO, in addition to my work as a composer. So I'm kind of, working around the clock. And we're doing tons of interesting stuff at YIVO. So if you're curious to learn more about, Yiddish or Jewish history, Jewish culture, I do also invite you to join me over at YIVO. You can go to yivo.org. We have a wonderful calendar of programs coming up. And we also have a wonderful YouTube channel with an archive of past events. So definitely lots of of things to engage with and things to learn from. And maybe I'll just chat you a few quick links right now if you're curious to of where you can continue.
I knew there'd be a commercial in there somewhere. So does anyone have any, I don't see any questions in the chat, but does anyone have any questions? Would you like to unmute yourself and ask if you have a question?
Oh.
Okay. I would like to ask about the orchestra. Obviously not Wagnerian, what we heard, in size. How early on did you come to grips with the pragmatics of opera production in the world today, that you probably needed a reduced orchestra? And in a larger sense, how much does pragmatism play in your artistic decisions?
That's a great question. I'd say I'm still coming to terms with it. So when we first started writing the opera, we wrote it with like a piano vocal score, just as a way to kind of workshop songs. And then when we had the chance to do this big preview, actually there was even another smaller preview where we did just the first act. And I did a version for 4 instruments plus choir and singers. And then we did this version and I jumped it up to, I think it's 7 instruments. It's a string quintet, clarinet, and piano, plus 11 singers in total. So that was really an exciting jump up. And I think, I'm happy with the sound world there, but I also, keep dreaming of, doing an orchestral version. So, we're going to see where it takes us, but we're happy that it can be done in this, version that's fairly manageable with 7 instrumentalists and 11 singers. And we would love to do a version that's bigger. And that's, in terms of that question, more broadly, it's always a challenge. How are you creative within the confines of the situation that you find yourself in? And, I always dream of working with a big orchestra. And that's something that really excites me. And sometimes I get the chance, but usually it's a smaller, group of people. And that's great too. And that it has its own challenges and its own kind of virtues that come of that situation. And so I just try to find, the great things, the great musical possibilities of whatever set of circumstances I'm in.
So would anyone else?
I want to know, Alyssa, what instrument did you start with and what instruments do you play?
So I actually started with the classical guitars, or the guitar, I should say, was my first instrument. And then I started playing the piano a little bit, and I started playing the viola. I played the viola to be in the high school orchestra that I alluded to. I was the worst violist in the school, but it was an amazing experience, and I totally loved it. I got to sit there in the middle of the orchestra and learn and hear from, just the center of all the action. But nowadays, I mostly play piano, and mostly it's just to write music or for my own enjoyment. I don't really play professionally.
So do you think when you write music, is that how you picture it? Do you play it when you're composing? How do you approach it?
I'd say it's a combination of all of those things, so I use my imagination, my inner ear. I play at the piano. That's a very helpful way for me to think through ideas. And I also think on the page or on the computer screen, so to speak. And that's a helpful way. And I think that each of those different ways of thinking, whether you're thinking in your inner ear, whether you're thinking in your hands, or whether you're thinking on the computer, each of those offers some benefits and each of those offers some drawbacks. And so I just try to kind of use a bit of all of them and not try to fall into any traps. Because like, for example, if you're writing only what you can play, sometimes you fall into a trap of just writing what feels comfortable from your muscle memory, so to speak. And so muscle memory can be a great kind of form of inspiration, but it can also be something that holds you back. And that's very much true with what kind of lends itself to being written on a computer. It's very much true of any way of working. And so I try to, work in different ways and stay creative and not fall into any traps.
Do you have perfect pitch?
I do not have perfect pitch.
Many of us have
Thank
no
you.
pitch.
I don't, but my mother used to say I was the best off-key singer she knew.
Wonderful.
Anyone else? I just like to say, but Alex, we'd love to go out with one more song, but before we do that, I just like to thank you for introducing us to Anna Margolin, the poet. And this poem, "And All the Days Were Purple," is particularly appropriate to today, to actually this day, today, when we lost our dear friend Lester Sharlock. But of all the people that we have lost during this COVID crisis, and the people we don't even know, and this poem says, you know, that we had happiness, we had glick, but we don't even have that. But listen, how over our joy there hovers, I'm adapting here, the smiling face of death, and all the days were purple, and all were hard. So, and some days things can be pretty hard and very purple. So can we go out with an Alex Weiser song in Yiddish?
Sure. So I'll pull up what I like to think of as the hit pop song of the album, which is a kind of central lyrical oasis of the song cycle called Poesia. And it's a poem by Avram Sutzkever, who was living in Vilna before the war, survived the Holocaust, has an actually unbelievable, incredible, fascinating story during the war. Actually, his whole life is really amazing, and I wish we had time to go into it. And it's actually connected to YIVO. So I encourage you to check that out. It's really fascinating. But this poem he wrote after the war in Israel, which is where he wound up. And I will play it for you. I put the text in Yiddish and translation in the box, in the chat box.
Atunco violette Flor, die letzte Din heideldig und zart wie a schwarzer Pool, was hat bei Nacht in Toi geloschen. Zappo.
And there's a question for you, Alex, about the cover. If you could say something about the cover of your album.
Sure. So when we finished with the album, we had this recording and we were going to release it. Suddenly we realized, oh, wow, we need to have a kind of visual language to represent the sound world and the ideas of the album. And it's a big challenge. I mean, especially for someone like me who thinks in terms of sounds and those kind of things. I didn't have a visual kind of counterpoint to what I was thinking initially. And I kind of asked around for recommendations for some artists, and I found through this wonderful Jewish artist organization that I am affiliated with called Asylum Arts. The head of that organization, Rebecca Goober, sent me a bunch of recommendations of artists, and I kind of went through a lot of different people. And this particular artist, Meredith Leich, who ended up making the album cover, her work really spoke to me, and it really felt kind of akin to the world that I was going for. And so I wrote to her, and she was very gracious to create new art for this album. And we had some wonderful conversations about, how to express what's going on in the music, what the ideas of the album, how to express that in the visual language. And I was very pleased with the work that she did. And if you get the album itself physically, it is available for streaming and all sorts of different digital consumption. But if you physically buy the album, there's a wonderful program booklet inside, which has all the texts, and it is wonderfully illustrated by Meredith Leich. So the same artist that made that cover made some illustrations throughout the program booklet. And it was a pleasure to work with her.
That's right. And Gail is asking, is that any particular city?
Well, we didn't talk about it being a particular city. I think in my heart, it's New York City, which is the city of cities, So, and that is the city that Anna Margolin was writing in. And I think it was her imagery that we were especially thinking about of that opening poem. But it's a city.
Yes, and it's again the clouds and the colors. And people are saying that how the music resonates with them, and your presentation, your explanations have been very helpful.
Well, thank you all so much for having me. It's been a pleasure to be with you and to share my work with you. And thank you for listening.
Thank you. I'm going to I'm going to leave the mics open for a little bit. And Alex, if you're hanging out, maybe people could chat with you or
Sure.
with each other. It's fine too. So thank you. And I'm not sure, but I think this is the Jewish Historical Society does opera, really? And Yiddish classical music. Yes, I know. Wow. So stay tuned.
Definitely
We have a dream that's far away, and it's going to happen.
Bravo.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Night at the Opera.
Yes.
With or without the Phantom.
I was thinking more along the lines of the Marx Brothers, but then again.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Alex
you
was
very much.
wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. David and Lisa, thank you.
Oh, I'm so
Thank
glad
you,
you could
Paul.
join us, Paul. Really.
Thank you very much, Paul. By the way, you write beautiful music, and we were just talking about you. So thank you so much for joining and for listening. I'm honored.
It's a pleasure. By the way, you had the piece for, was it 8 cellos that was a companion piece to a Steve Reich?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, he's, we were at graduate school at the same time.
Oh, is that right?
He was at Mills, I was at Berkeley. I was in class with Terry Riley and Lamont Young.
Wow.
But I met Steve out there at the time, and he was a very important influence on my music.
Yeah, we were just talking about your palindrome for organ, and I was hearing, so a lot of those kind of like those ideas of looping and of the way that, repetition and changing, it seems to resonate with a lot of, I mean, I love that music.
Yeah, it's the early pieces particularly.
Yeah.
Piano Face was the one that really had the big influence on me. I did an article about it and way back, and really got inside it, and saw several performances of it with Nuri Tillis and.
Wonderful. When I was in college, that was like the fun, nerdy thing that we would do is we would all try to play piano phase with each other. Even though we weren't pianists and we couldn't phase, we tried.
That's one of those things you can either do it or not, apparently.
It's very hard.
He told me. And there were a few people who could do it. The drumming is the other one that...
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I love those pieces. And I really love also... a little bit later is my particular sweet zone, when in like 1978 or whatever, when he gets to 8 lines or octet, and then later renamed 8 lines. That's kind of like my Reich sweet spot.
Yeah,
but I love the early stuff too.
Music for 18 Instruments is the piece, I think, where he
absolutely
enriched the palette.
Yeah, it's a classic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to listening to more of your music soon. I've got I was just reading the Kyle Gann article, and I've got more pieces on my list now.
Oh.
Well, it's an honor. Thank you all so much for joining.
It was terrific presentation, and really enjoyed it. And as Elisa said, your explanations and your analysis really thought-provoking, and we learned a lot.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. So I would mention that at the risk of embarrassing Jean Barnes, but Jean and Ella both. But Jean, you've got a musical background that may be of interest in some of your early years with choral groups.
The furthest I went was music criticism in a string of suburban newspapers in the Detroit area. Was a choir director for a while and at some churches. That's about it. I have collected considerable numbers of recordings at this point, all of which, I prefer to ask Spotify to play, like everyone else, right? So, yeah, that's about it.
Wonderful.
Go ahead.
No, I just said that's wonderful.
Okay, well, all good things must end. Alex, sei gesund.
All right, sei gesund, stark.
And on bigger and better, on to all good things.
Right.
Thank you very much. Take care, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
Live long and prosper.